Hey, good Tuesday evening, everyone. State Representative Brad Halbrook here, along with my good friends and colleagues in the Illinois General Assembly, State Senator Leader Andrew Chesney, and State Representative Leader David Freese, and the Director of the Illinois Freedom Caucus, Leader Colin Mosley. Guys, it's been a couple weeks. I've been traveling last week and was tied up with something the week before. I think you guys got through the live streams without me. I appreciate you guys doing that, and so it's great to be back. It's the thrill of a live stream, and so yeah, it's great to be here. Everybody doing okay since we've been out of Springfield for what, nearly 2.5, 3 weeks now, 2.5 weeks.
Brad, nobody does the live stream like you. You know, we figured it out. We did okay, but we're glad to have Leader Hallbrook back.
Well, thanks for that. I have not. I'll be honest. I have not went back and replayed the videotape because I don't want to see how good you guys really did. So anyhow, yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, I'm with Andrew, and like you, I've been traveling. Finally back. Went from session to doing a little traveling. Trying to get caught up at the office has been a struggle.
Yeah, I understand. Well, we got a few more people joining us here live and hopefully in demand for the next several days before we do this again next Tuesday evening. And gentlemen, with that, let's get right into our slides. We want to talk about this lawsuit that we have filed, the Illinois Freedom Caucus has filed, and our trip to D.C. last week to be with the three different governors from deep blue states across the nation. So with that, let's get right into our first slide of the evening about the legal challenge to the corrupt budgeting process. Andrew Chesney, you've taken the lead on this. I'm just going to kind of tee it up to you, and then we'll go to Representative Leader Freese, and we'll kind of talk through these two slides here.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Brad. And for those that are listening, the rules are pretty simple. You should have an opportunity to read bills that you're asking us to vote on. That's the way that we represent you. I would point briefly to the homeschool bill when it was properly being vetted and there was an opposition or the ability to oppose the bill. And you saw that the Capitol was filled with opposition and the bill was subsequently defeated this session. Now it will be coming back, but was temporarily defeated. The challenge that we have is we are being asked to vote on very critical pieces of legislation. In many cases, legislation that we know is coming up. In our view, the most important job we have, I would say, is passing the budget because it's the moral document. It just happens to be immoral, which is why the Democrats put it forward. But they move a bill through the legislative process that has nothing in it. It has like 3 words or 1 sentence. And they vote on this bill, they put it into committee, and they call that a shell bill. And then a few hours before the legislative session ends, they put this bill into the record and they file an amendment, and they're asking the legislative body to vote on this bill. Now, the average person can read, 230 words a minute. And so we did the math. It would take a day, reading 16 hours a day, to read many of these bills and the amendments and all the things that have to do and interact with the budget. And so the Democrat majorities are intentionally circumventing the 3 reading rule, depriving our constituencies of the ability to solicit feedback from them, and giving us no ability to mount any opposition to these bills. So this is how tax increases get put into place. This is how the Safety Act got done. This is how the gas tax got done. All of these very punitive pieces of legislation are getting done through the violation of these 3 reading rules. Now, what happened? The Supreme Court said during the enrolled bill doctrine, which is just legal mumbo jumbo to say really simply one thing: if the Speaker of the House and the Senate President have certified that these readings have taken place, that satisfies the 3 reading requirement. Now, there have been some appellate court rulings that have said, legislature, you can't do this. We've had some Supreme Court justices that have said, you can't do this. And so what we're doing as a Freedom Caucus, we are asking the state Supreme Court to revisit this position and simply allow our constituencies and every constituency throughout the state of Illinois that if we have a bill we like or dislike, we should be able to, at a minimum, know some of the bones within that. So we're
Mhm.
asking the Supreme Court to put some guardrails around this. So we took the lead on this. The Illinois Freedom Caucus took the lead on this. We're the ones that put our name on the lawsuit or the complaint, and we're going to start to take this to court. Now, you're going to hear some other people that are going to try to do something similar, but this is at the crux of this is how the Democrats are putting forward and enacting some of the most ridiculous pieces of legislation that, in my view, are in violation of this 3-reading rule.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. David Freeze, this is the biggest piece of legislation that we see the entire year. They know every year what it's got to be done. 3,000 plus pages, many more when you add the BIMP bill, the budget implementation plan. What's your thoughts on how this all is shaken out?
Well, Leader Chesney summarized it, just awesome. Yeah, I would add, when I'm talking to my constituents about this, as Andrew pointed out, the reason the homeschool bill was defeated, at least on a temporary basis, is because all the pushback that it got, not only in our area, in districts, but across the state.
Mm-hmm.
It's my understanding that the Black Caucus was adamantly opposed to that. And why? Well, because their constituents were.
Mm-hmm.
So think about it. If a tax increase bill, the budget was, introduced midway through session, and it could get out and say, hey, guys, this is what your leaders, your representatives want to spend money on. Okay. And then we can advocate for or against that, along with any tax increase that's in there. So this is one of the reasons why we continue to have tax increase after tax increase in this state, is because it happens in the dead of night at the 11th hour with zero, input from not only our constituents, but across the state, because I guarantee it, people in Chicago don't want any more tax increases. How many times have you heard them, complain about the property taxes? So now you're going to add additional taxes onto that, and rumor is we're going to see more taxes during veto session. It's that the package tax or electronic media, advertisement tax, something. We will see guaranteed another tax during veto session, and we need to get out in front of that, and we need to advocate, oppose that right now, and make people aware of that.
Right, exactly. Gentlemen, let's go on to the next slide here. We've kind of talked about some of this. Have we spent enough time talking about how this gut and replace tactic works? Gentlemen, I'll kind of open that up. Kind of maybe explain. I know Senator Chesney, you kind of talked about how they moved this bill. I think you're the Senate majority leader, the president of the Senate, said this is a bill that is kind of in name only. It's a title bill, or there's no content to it, as they were moving it through the Senate process.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a difference between adding structural amendments that change a bill built on negotiations, and there's between filing a bill with no intent of disclosing its contents. And with these shell bills, we aren't even getting the framework, an opportunity to see the framework of a given bill. Now, we recognize amendments have to and often do take place as a result of negotiations, but it isn't like we saw the budget and they moved around 10% through negotiations with their respective caucuses. We saw nothing. So as Leader Freeze pointed out, we have no ability to take on an Amazon or a package tax or the pizza tax, whatever you want to call it. The reason it got stalled out is the House Democrats hit the brake on it. It flew through the Senate. And so now it's dead, but not because the Democrats don't want the package tax. It's dead because their constituencies are losing their mind over it.
Yes,
and all we needed was 48 hours. But that 3-reading rule, that protects groups that we closely associate with, that we would call our friends and allies, but also groups that we disagree with that get screwed on this budget process too. Every interest group and most importantly, the constituencies we represent.
Mm-hmm.
In the last 4 hours, don't know if they're going to get a good deal or a raw deal in Springfield because of the violation of this 3 reading process. Now, there's been some renewed interest by the greater Republican minority party on this issue, but it was the Freedom Caucus that took the lead on this, and that's why we're going to have a court date July 3rd.
Exactly. Representative Freeze, any thoughts here that you might have? And then I want to bring in a commenter here before we leave this subject matter real quick. So, Representative Freeze?
No, I just reiterate this. It's really shameful the way this is conducted. Almost zero debate, zero discussion, and zero chance for the constituents and citizens of Illinois to oppose any of this.
Right. And I think go ahead, Colin.
I was just going to say, the average person on the street, when you explain this to them, it's outrageous. Mm-hmm. Because it's not even a partisan issue. There's nobody that believes their taxes should be raised at midnight in a bill that has only been available to read for a few hours. And, so you have what's right and what's wrong legally, constitutionally, and then you also have just, the court of public opinion. And, we have to raise awareness about this issue, especially when the mainstream legacy media is totally complacent in exposing these people in the way that they do business. So, we are trying to move forward with an issue that by and large, every reasonable person knows is wrong. And 2 justices on our Illinois Supreme Court know it's wrong. 2 appellate courts know it's wrong, as they've ruled before. And so we're just trying to lean on those people we know that are on our side in the judicial branch.
Yeah. I think this last bullet point here on this slide is time for the judicial branch to correct this bad behavior. And again, the Democrats continue to treat taxpayers like they're just these human ATM machines. I think it's just shameful the way they act. It's just
we're an endless piggy bank for these knuckleheads.
Yeah. Hey, let me bring in this. This is really an interesting comment. I think we can see that across the bottom. Make the names fit the content. So this is part of this shell bill or this gut and replace, right? We see these bills move from one chamber to the other. I remember last year there was a bill about dental insurance reimbursement or something, and that became the CO2 bill, the carbon bill. And we've seen that all that last week of this spring session, bill after bill. The title had nothing to do with what ultimately became the content of the bill. Gentlemen,
the assisted suicide bill was a food sanitation bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife actually happened to be in the gallery during that debate, and when she looked up on the board and she saw that, and she's like, "What the hell is going on?" She absolutely blew a gasket when I saw her, and she was going like, she was, why and how do these people get away with this stuff?
Yeah, right. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. These examples can go on for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about the trip to D.C. last week. Governor Hochul, Governor Walz, and Governor Pritzker, all from deep blue states, were called in to testify before the House Oversight Committee. There was 4, 5, 6 of us there last week, and we got to witness that hearing. It was from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., and so it was kind of interesting. So let's go to Senator Chesney, if you want to kind of speak about your experience there, and then we'll go to Freeze and Colin, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with some closing thoughts.
Yeah, so these are 80-20 issues, and the Freedom Caucus is getting involved in issues that we believe every reasonable person should get involved on. Getting men out of women's bathrooms, getting them out of men out of women's sports, but also, starting with following the law. And, we are a nation of laws, and we saw 20 million illegal immigrants come into our country under Joe Biden's administration. And so President Trump is correctly addressing this issue. And you've seen very progressive, very liberal, very out of touch governors that have used the power of the incumbency, the power of their own personal wealth to, put their thumb on the scale, very unpopular policies. They always put these immigrants in these welcoming centers in very poor communities that overload our schools and put great strain on all of our resources, but also divert resources from the legal citizens that we all represent. We don't talk enough about the victims that are created as a result of this immigration policy. You know, these are vital services that are not getting to the people we all care for because they're being diverted. Billions and billions of dollars and millions of local dollars are being spent. That would be your school districts and all your township assistants, etc. Schools, hospitals, everything are being diverted away from the legal residents of this state as a result of these immigration policies. And Governor Pritzker's response is just such an out of touch trust fund response, right? It's just a guy that he just came off as a guy that put his money in the Cayman Islands. You don't even have to ask him. He just kind of comes off kind of smug and just dismissive and how dare you? And it showed in his interview. And I think Leader Wilhauer said it really well in the Fox News interview. You know, Governor Pritzker's not ready for prime time. You know, he spent $400 million buying these elections with a supermajority Supreme Court gerrymandered maps, and he's pushing out the producers of the state. So he's bought these elections. But, you know, this progressive ideology isn't going to work in Iowa, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. I mean, men don't want to be in women's sports in Georgia, right? I mean, it's just not going to work. And so he's going to have a unique challenge. One, navigating a Democrat primary with all these pro-Palestinian Democrats. That'll be interesting. But also just his policies and his record is horrific, from taxation to regulation, business and job growth, etc. So it was nice to have a seat right behind Governor Pritzker to see the insanity up close in person. But of course, living in Illinois, we see it every day.
Right, exactly. David, you weren't able to be there. I don't know how much you've seen of it or heard about it, but just your thoughts on how that all went down.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was not able to make that trip. I did see clips of it. I saw a Leader Wilhauer's little segment there. I get tickled at the governor's comments because he says, "Yeah, we need to get violent criminal illegals out of the state." Is what he says, but he doesn't do anything to really make that happen, which again puzzles me. We should be working with ICE. If you've got somebody who's in this country illegally, that person's in jail or in prison. When that person gets out, ICE should be there. That's right. That's one of these things. Like Andrew said, that's an 80-20 issue at least, if not 90-10. I was in the service and I had thanks to Uncle Sam, I had an opportunity to go to numerous different countries. And I tell people this all the time. I said, not once did I think that where I landed, did the laws of that country not apply to me. And in fact, we would have briefings before we left, and they say, hey, by the way, just because you're American, don't think you're exempt. So why do they think they're exempt from our immigration laws? They come across the border illegally, and now they've got a right to stay here. Never for the life of me understood that logic, but here we are.
Right. Well, I think it was kind of interesting as I believe Congresswoman Mace opened up her comments. I think she talked about rolling out the 2028 presidential Democrat primary, and I think she kind of felt sad for California Governor Newsom was not able to be there with his crew. But yeah. So Brandon Gill, freshman from Texas, did some great comments, kind of stumped the governor on his about if he'd ever used a woman's restroom.
I saw that.
You got to find
that. Was great.
That's a great clip. Several of them. Mary Miller did a great job in her 5. And again, they're just allowed 5 minutes, right? And so some of these the testimony would just kind of, they'd want to ramble on.
Yeah.
And
they would filibuster.
Yeah. And then they say, reclaiming my time to try to get back on track. It was kind of comical to watch all of that. So yeah, Darren LaHood did a great job. Several of the Republicans right to the point, trying to get the answers. And of course, these 3 Democrat governors just wanted to kind of skirt it as best they could and filibuster, like you said, David. Yeah, it's a bad deal. So, hey, gentlemen, we're kind of winding this down. Any closing thoughts? Let's kind of go in reverse order here. Let's go to David Freese. Any closing thoughts? And then Senator Chesney, and then Colin, we'll bring up our closing slide at the end. So, yeah,
I would just encourage everybody, stay tuned in, stay engaged. And pay attention. We have our lame duck already set. It's in October. I can't remember the dates, but and I hate saying this, but we do live in Illinois. Just be prepared for additional taxes, whatever. Something will hit. because we have what they're referring to as the fiscal cliff for mass transit in Chicago. They gotta fund it somehow. They're not going to cut the budget anyplace else. They're going to raise our taxes again. So just be prepared. Stay engaged.
Right, Senator Chesney.
Well, we saw Speaker Mike Madigan get correctly sentenced to over 7 years in federal prison. He put the political apparatus around the state of Illinois for probably a half century, and then clearly we've seen Governor Pritzker's interest more on the national stage than the state stage. So a lot of his billions of dollars is going to start to move in different directions. And a lot of the blue collar voters are coming back to us. And I think that's in large part the credit of President Trump becoming the working class party the Republican Party is. And so don't give up hope. We're surrounded by red and purple states. I know it's very discouraging, but I live in an area where we're very close to Wisconsin and very close to Iowa. We border it in this district. And so we see the changes. The people around us are seeing the changes, but also don't think the people in Chicago and the greater Chicagoland area don't see the impacts of their toxic policies. We have a mayor in the city of Chicago that's got a 7 to 9% approval rating, and his positions are just as awful as the governor's. He's just not quite as Governor Pritzker's is slightly more popular. So don't give up hope. We're on the right message. The Democrats are all over the place on their messaging. Just we got to hold the line, get out and vote, get the right people engaged. But we're on the right track. We just got to keep fighting.
Right, exactly. Colin, I'm going to bring up a comment here. I don't know if you can see it or not, and then we'll bring up our closing slide. But it says, how can we raise awareness? We'll bring up the closing slide. If you have an answer, how we raise awareness to things.
Well, let me first say on this slide with the picture of Mary, I don't want to move on before I forget to say, this is an example of the connection between the State Freedom Caucus and the House Freedom Caucus. When the Illinois Freedom Caucus is a member of the family of Freedom Caucuses, and that includes the D.C. Congressional House Freedom Caucus, which Mary Miller is a member of. And so we were truly able to work together and partner with her and other members of Congress and national resources out there. And that's the benefit and the partnership and membership. As far as raising awareness, I think it goes in right to our next slide. I mean, we say it all the time, but like, share, and subscribe. We truly have to tell our neighbors, tell our friends, not only about the Illinois Freedom Caucus, but about what's going on. Because here's the deal, guys, and we know this. If you're paying a utility bill, the Democrats are punishing you. If you own property, the Democrats are punishing you. If you're a firearm owner, the Democrats are punishing you. If you get pizza or Amazon delivered to your home, the Democrats want to punish you. And it really is that simple. And so we have to be willing to carry that message to our friends, our neighbors, the people you're sitting in church with on Sunday morning. So just please, don't be afraid. Don't shy away. That's what the left wants, and we can't let it happen.
Exactly.
Yeah, cannot be silenced.
Yeah, exactly. Gentlemen, thanks for joining in. I think it was a great discussion tonight. And as always, we would appreciate that you like, share, follow, subscribe to our content. And that helps get the word out. And that does help bring awareness. And with that, unless something happens between now and next Tuesday, we'll see you next Tuesday evening.
Good job.